So this is a 35mm f1.4 G Master lens, and this is 50mm f1.2 G Master lens. And in this video, I'm going to answer the question, how does a 35mm compare to a 50 in a crop mode, so APS-C mode? Can you just use this one lens in your photography, like being both 35 and a 50, or do you need both? Let's find out. Hello everyone, my name is Magic. I'm a destination wedding photographer, Sony Europe ambassador, father of 4 children, and welcome to this YouTube channel that I mostly talk about lenses, cameras, and gear for wedding photographers, Sony gear mainly. So consider subscribing if you are a wedding shooter shooting or considering Sony cameras. So this is kind of a part 2 video. There's one video I made before, which is a 24 1.4 G Master in a crop mode, in an APS-C mode versus a 35 G Master, and how does these two compare. And at the end of the day, I found out that the difference is not that significant, and you can actually use 24 as both 24 and a 35 if you can deal with the cropped smaller image. So if you're interested in that as well, you can check my other video here, and also I kind of go more into details about what crop is in that other video. So here, let me just briefly tell you that when you use a crop in photography, it basically means you are using a smaller portion of a sensor. So if you take photos in a crop mode, APS-C mode, the image will be actually smaller. So here I'll be using Sony A7IV in the test, which is 33 megapixels in a full frame mode, but in a crop mode is around 14 megapixels. So that 14 megapixels is still plenty for photography. It's still more than many of the cameras. It's more than when you take photos with A7S3, so for many of you it might be enough. But the most important thing to remember, when you're switching your camera to APS-C mode in photography, you're basically doing the same thing as you would crop the image later on in the post-processing. And there are two major differences between doing this later on in the post-process and doing this in camera. So first of all, if you do it in camera, you cannot take it back, okay? So cropped image will be cropped image. There's no way you can bring back those pixels and make it wider later on. While you can do that in Lightroom, right? You can crop the image, and if you still have a RAW, you can just uncrop it or cancel your crop. And the second thing is that if you take photos in an APS-C mode in a camera, you see the actual final frame in the viewfinder, which you wouldn't see if you crop it later on, right? You will see the wider image. So there's basically two major differences between using a crop in a camera and then using the crop later on in post-processing. This doesn't relate to video. In video, if you're using crop or full frame, you still get 4K or full HD depending on which resolution you're shooting. So I think that's why the crop mode is way more popular among videographers and video shooters than it is among photographers. But here we're talking photography, and let's look at some images. So 35mm f1.4 G Master in crop in Sony will give you equivalent of a 54mm f2.1 lens. So that's equivalent in the full frame. So this is what you would achieve in terms of the angle of view and the bokeh effect. I strongly recommend the tool called Dof Simulator, that you can simulate whatever lenses on whatever sensors you can use to see how much depth of field you will get, how blurry the image will be, and basically what kind of image you will get. Very cool tool. But coming back, so that Dof told me that my 35 G Master on APS-C mode means we are dealing with more or less 54mm f2.1 lens. So it's kind of closer to a 55 1.8 lens from Sony. That's why I also took some test shots with this lens to add this to comparison. All the photos that you will see were shot using a tripod, so we have the same frame. I was changing lenses as quickly as I can. My subject, my wife, wasn't moving, so we can actually have the same images to compare. All the photos are also edited with my Magic Cadabra preset, the best presets out there. Purchase. The link is in the description. And yeah, and the lens corrections are off in all of the images. Okay, so let's look at the images. Portrait number 1 is like the mid-distance portrait, let's say. So on the left we have a 35G master in a crop mode. On the right we have 51.2, and like immediately we can see the differences. Like first, smaller difference is that we can see that 50 is slightly wider, so the frame is slightly wider. That's due to the fact that this is a 50 and a 35 in a crop mode is more of a 54, so we have like a tighter view angle. But most significantly, what we see is a difference in terms of the image look. The 51.2 gives us that dreamy effect. The bokeh is way more blurred, like smoother, like everything is just more soft in this image, but not the subject that we focused on. It's stack sharp. It's sharp on both 51.2 and a 35 in a crop mode. And maybe it's not that surprising because 35G Master is a very sharp lens, and here we're talking about even cropped center of the image. So even though the image is smaller itself, so it's half of the size, so we cannot zoom that much in, we can clearly see the individual hair pieces. So like the image is super sharp, so the difference comes down to how much the background is blurred. There's one more thing that we will see comparing these two images. You could tell that a 51.2G Master is slightly darker, especially on the edges, so that's Vignette. Since the lens corrections are off, we can see the Vignette is here. It's not on a cropped 35, mostly because we are cropping the Vignette from the image. 35G Master as a lens, it does Vignette as well, but it does Vignette on the edges, and we did crop out the edges because of turning into APS-C mode. But that is something that can be easily removed in the post-process and just simply fixed. But what happens if we step down a 50G Master to a 2.2, so closer to that 2.1 equivalent of a 35 in crop mode? Here we can tell that images are looking more similar now. So the background blur is kind of matching here, so you can clearly see the difference. And now switching to a 55 1.8 lens, this is what we get. So on the right, 55 1.8, on the left, 35G Master in a crop mode. You can see the images are very similar, and then stepping down a 55 to 2.2 gives us even more matching result. So that 55 is way closer, even wide open, to a 35 in crop mode than 50G Master is. Okay, let's look at a couple more images, maybe even closer portraits, but you will see that differences remain the same. So 50G Master, if wide open, will definitely give you right away a different image. Like you can clearly see the image is different. It's more dreamy, it's more smooth, it's more bokeh-licious in the background. Especially look at this image. I kind of feel that this is what you get a 51.24. There's no way you can achieve that effect with a 35G Master in a crop mode or a 55 1.8 at 1.8. It's just a different image look. Even though the frame is the same, even though, you know, the sharpness and everything else is the same, the look will be different. And just to prove that difference on the bokeh balls, so the sophisticated Lego test, we do have Lego Loki here with a bokeh loving background. It's a very close image, so you can clearly see the difference between on the left 35 in crop mode, on the right 51.2. The bokeh balls are way bigger on 51.2, and this is what it comes down to, in my opinion. That difference is way more significant than it was in 24 in crop mode versus 35, since back then we are talking about two wide angle lenses. The bokeh wasn't that different as it is right here. So 35mm f1.4G Master in crop mode will give you a 50mm lens equivalent, will give you a look of a 50mm lens, but not necessarily of 51.2G Master, as this is just the lens one of a kind. It's 1.2. Like, you get this lens to get this sort of dreamy images, right? And that 1.2 is just unbeatable. You can definitely say that 35G Master in a crop mode is more like a 55 1.8 size. So if you're happy with that, getting a 35G master will give you like two lenses. And if you are good with having a smaller image at the end of the day, so like a smaller resolution of a cropped image, if you're fine with that, you have a 35 and a 55 with just that one lens. But if you're after that more dreamy look, if you're after that 1.2 background blur, there is no other way than getting a 51.2 lens. So me personally, I use both of these. These are mounted on my cameras all the time, 35 on one camera, 50 on the other camera, and clearly you can see they will give you a very, very different result. How about you? Are you 1.2 lover too? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching the video and see you in the next one.